me that Dorsey, man. You don't need the Dorsey. Oh, it's the Dorsey. Well,
Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagle. I'm the CEO of Metal Blade Records. The next time you're in Las Vegas, or if you currently live in Las Vegas or the Las Vegas area, you need to visit the Metal Blade Museum. Now, not only are there artifacts from Metal Blade artists like Metallica, Slayer, Cannibal Corpse, Gwar, Lizzie Borden, there's also artifacts from bands that we had something to do with as well, like Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, Alice in Chains, Deep Purple, Thin Lizzy, Alice Cooper, all sorts of stuff. So it's a really great metal museum. It's located right near the Strip in Las Vegas. Also, our retail store is also now in the museum. So you can go pick up your Metal Blade vinyl, CDs, collectibles, shirts, all sorts of cool stuff. Just go to metalblade.com/museum for all the details. This episode, we're talking about Ministry's great song, Just One Fix. Definitely a really interesting song. I think very, very important to the heavy metal genre because it was really technically the first big popular industrial metal song. And that was, again, came out in the early 90s when things were changing and, you know, the whole grunge movement was happening. And then also this really cool underground industrial metal thing was happening as well. That, you know, to me was pretty, especially this particular album, not Psalm 69. It's pretty heavy metal. A lot of it is pretty heavy metal. This song in particular has just an amazing riff. So going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk to my good friend who works at Metal Blade Records, Mr. Ryan Williams on the production end of things, a little bit of a new voice here, and my good friend, Mr. Monte Pittman, who is currently in Ministry. But first, as always, we start with Martin Popoff.
Ministry, Just One Fix, important song in the history of metal. And of course, this is an important song and an important band, Ministry. This is Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker. But this is an important band along with White Zombie in the history of industrial metal, right there in the middle of the 1990s. So this is from Psalm 69, The Way to Succeed and the Way to Suck Eggs. Issued July 14th, 1992. We're looking at the second track on the album. Yeah, this goes by another title as well, but I mean, generally we just consider it Psalm 69. It's the second track on the album, second biggest song on here. Biggest is Jesus Built My Hot Rod. That was the hit. And then, of course, we've got the opening song that was also important. I mean, this is a kind of band that basically lays the blueprint for the immense Rammstein, you would think. But yeah, very similar to White Zombie. They were doing well at the time. Very stomping, tribal sort of song. You've got no vocal until 1:16 into the track. Vocals are mixed way back. They're hard to understand. There's really no variation to this thing. There's a couple of little short breaks, some atmospheric sort of guitar solos. It's goth. Industrial metal kind of goes to that goth space as well. And there's a couple of change ups in the rhythm. It's essentially a dancey, trancy kind of effect that you're getting, but it's also a hardcore punk effect at the same time. And you could say there's a little bit of Metallica Black Album in it as well, because we are looking at what is squarely a heavy metal riff in here. But of course, it's just very industrial, really good production, but very industrial, mechanized drums on the whole situation. But yeah, the beat changes to halftime at one point, but again, same riff. There's a couple of kind of punctuated breakups at the 3-minute mark. You get the first change in riff, but then it's quickly back again. And so, yeah, you're just lulled into this pounding sort of trance feel on this thing. Now, the previous two albums by Ministry went gold, and then this actually went platinum. It took till 95 to go platinum. This band is one of these that kind of commits commercial suicide and kind of blows it all up with Filth Pig. I remember when that happened, playing that album and just being kind of horrified. The only other band I can think of a little bit like this, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with drugs and stuff as well, and it's the same time, is Alice in Chains with the Alice in Chains album. I felt like that was a commercial suicide type album as well. But yeah, so it goes platinum. Filth Pig, by the way, it goes kind of halfway to gold. So it's a big drop off, and they kind of deserve it because it's a really opaque and hard to love sort of album. Not that this is a warm, embracing pop album either. I mean, this is very opaque and challenging music. But anyways, it did go platinum, and it went gold in Canada and Australia as well. So yeah, absolutely important song in this very important kind of movement that we got in the mid-90s there called industrial metal.
Thank you, Martin. Always love his perspective on things. Martin, if you didn't know, has written almost 150 books on hard rock and heavy metal. So he knows what he's talking about. It was really interesting. Didn't expect him to go after Ministry there quite as much as he did on the follow-up record. But, those things happen. We've seen that with a lot of bands where they put out a bunch of really amazing records and then, it's almost impossible to have an entire career where every record is great. I don't know that any band has really ever been able to do that. Certainly in the hard rock metal world, if there are, you can count them on maybe one hand if there are. But always good to hear from Martin.
This episode is brought to you by Stouffer's. Here comes 3-time juggling champion Natalia Rogers. She's juggling law school, her TA job. Oh, narrowly catches the laundry. What's that fourth ball? Parents unexpectedly showed up at dinner time? Is that too much for Natalia? Not with Stouffer's Chicken Alfredo and its mouth-watering mix of Asiago, Romano, and Parmesan. When you're juggling 4 things at once and the clock strikes dinner, think Stouffer's.
Now we welcome in a man who is a former member of the Black Dahlia Murder, also did some production with Black Dahlia Murder and many other bands, and currently is A&R at some label called Metal Blade Records. Mr. Ryan Williams, how are you, sir?
Hey, Brian, doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for doing this. Gotta get some new blood in here every once in a while. So welcome to the podcast.
I love it. Well, Jay Rustin's big shoes to fill.
Jay Rustin and Mark Lewis and Bill Matoyer and Butch Vig,
yeah, exactly.
So many of them. We're going to talk to you today about the great Ministry song, Just One Fix. Well, this is a really interesting one because on the production end of things, we're talking about the 1990s and what Ministry brought in here with this song is really they kind of helped usher in a whole new scene with this industrial metal stuff. And this is one of the first, metal-ish sounding records, I guess, that has not real drums on it, which is kind of a big step for metal and for people in the metal world. But it was such a different thing, and the song was so heavy. It worked, actually.
Totally. I mean, I feel like they were basically inventing a whole genre at this point in time. And there wasn't like 20 years of some stuff to go back to and look at and copy. They were on the fly making things happen. So really cool time and really cool scene, even though I think Al ended up hating the term industrial. They definitely made something happen here.
All artists hate terms that the press and everybody else comes around with. So, I get that, but that's just part of the game. But this was really interesting again because, and this is, the early editions of Pro Tools was very, it wasn't really widely used and different drum sounds and all that sort of stuff were really not used at this point. For them to do that on this record, and specifically the song was kind of a groundbreaking in its own way, I think.
Totally. I mean, this was recorded in 91 or 92 in that era. And I don't think Pro Tools was even out until a few years after this. So they were creating all these drum samples, laying all the different samples in the song, doing all the effects, without the help of digital tools. Where now, I would be able to do this stuff pretty easily. But back then it was an entirely different process, cutting tape, just really really a lot more difficult. So it really lends itself to their creativity at the time, because it was a lot of work back then to make all this stuff happen.
Big time. People think, oh, it's easy just to have, a drum machine or whatever, a compressor or whatever they were using to create the sounds, but not back then, because it's just as difficult as if you're recording a live drum set, because you still have to go through the same things and the same edits. And like you said, cutting tape, which if you don't know what cutting tape is, we've talked about it a lot on this show, because we've talked about a lot of records that were made on tape. But, back in the day, pre-Pro Tools, instead of just editing things together, you would actually have to cut the 2-inch tape that you're recording on to piece it all together. Of course, the most famous version of that would be the Metallica Black album, where they had, I can't remember if they talked about it in some of the documentaries or not, but they had, I think, 5 or 6 people in the studio whose job was just to cut tape, especially with the drums. They're cutting all these drum parts together, and it was pretty crazy. I remember being in the studio, like, what are all these guys doing? They're all there just to cut tape. I was like, wow, that's pretty insane.
Totally. I read some interviews with Al too, and he said that he was actually doing that. And, they were on substances at the time, let's just say, and he was up doing that stuff all himself. So I think it's a lost art now too. I don't think you'd meet a lot of engineers from the current era who'd even know how to do it, myself included. So,
I mean, there's no need to now with Pro Tools.
Right.
Pro Tools does the same thing, but it's all computerized.
Exactly.
The other thing too is, I mean, there's not, when you look at this record as a whole, not this song in particular, but the whole record, with the drum sounds and the drum beats, because they were different than regular metal bands were. And this was, you can kind of go back and say this might even be an early origin of blast beats.
I was going to comment on the drum pattern on this too, because it's very non-traditional when you look at it from like a metal or rock standpoint. It's got the snares on 1, 2, 3, 4, which is just not really done in rock music. And then there's a kick on 3 and 4 and. So it gives it that industrial vibe, but it also, you can tell that they built these samples and they made these samples and they processed them all together, and it's layered. There's probably, I don't know, the snare is probably 3 or 4 different drums blended together. And you can really tell they put a lot of work into that. And actually, a funny side note that Mike Faley actually told me is that Screw, the band Screw, was recording at Trax in Chicago, where they also recorded this album. And Screw, they would go over to the other studio and hang out with Al and see what was going on. And they ended up liking the drum sounds that they created over there so much that they ended up using them on the Screw album. So I just thought that was a really kind of interesting side note there.
Well, there's even more to that story. I mean, I knew Al because they used to record a lot in Tornillo, Texas, which is where Cannibal Corpse recorded, this really crazy recording studio on this pecan farm this pecan farmer had, 30 minutes outside of El Paso. So I got to know Al pretty well down there, and he was not as into the substances then as he was before. So he was a little bit more lucid. But I remember he ended up actually kind of producing that Screw record, or one of the Screw records. And he just kind of said, hey, I'm going to help these guys out. I'm going to do this. We're like, oh, cool. So, he does it. I said, what can we pay you? What do we owe you? He said, just send me a case of Jack Daniels and we'll call it even.
Wow. Yeah. And
all right, that's a good deal.
Amazing deal. And I think Al kind of just taught himself too, kind of engineering, producing. He would kind of like steal things from other engineers' settings, and you know what I mean? In that time, there was no YouTube. There was no way to learn this stuff other than just kind of hanging out with engineers, trying things yourself. So yeah, I give him a lot of credit for sculpting this sonically the way that it is, for sure.
Yeah, and in Tornillo, they actually built a whole nother room down there just for Al, because he loved it down there. I think he was living down there for a while and just making music in the studio. And they built this whole studio just for him and around him and what he wanted. It was really kind of interesting. Cool. I think they were pretty much finished with it when we were down there. But I was talking to the guy that owned the studio and Al about the whole process, and it was pretty interesting. It was a lot different than the regular studio. The regular studio had the big gigantic SSL board and the whole thing, and Al's was a little bit different because the kind of music they were making was different. So it had more of those processors and these other things. You can look, there's an article somewhere that I looked up when I was doing research on this, and Al kind of talks about how they programmed the drums and did all these things on the, I guess now they would be primitive
right.
rendition of those drum machines sort of
drum
thing.
machines. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so impressive that when you look back on it now and you listen to the record now, I mean, it still sounds really great, still sounds really fresh. But how many bands really kind of took stuff from there? Like, to me, like I said before, like a lot of the blast beat stuff, you can trace it back to this early Ministry stuff. You can kind of hear what they were trying to do. Not as fast, obviously, but there was some fast stuff. But just the way it sounded.
Totally. And the other thing too, just on the sonics in general, that I noticed. Well, first of all, I mean, the guitar tone I think is just phenomenal on this and holds up to this day. I mean, if I got this guitar tone turned in on a band from today, I would be stoked. It's still amazing. I couldn't find the exact details on everything they used. I think it was probably, a Marshall, maybe modified, probably vintage 30s with a boost, which is just kind of like a classic setup, and it just holds the test of time. It just still sounds great. Overall, I felt like the mix, it doesn't have a ton of low end. It's kind of more weighted towards the mids and the highs, which is kind of cool because as you kind of crank it up, it just kind of sounds better the louder you play it, which is really interesting. And it's, I guess it was kind of indicative of the times, that kind of mixing style, but it's cool. It's different. It's really in your face, and it still sounds great to this day.
100%. And it's interesting because, again, you look at the time, and of course this was, when metal was basically being wiped off the map with grunge music as it needed to be at that point. So you had the grunge stuff would have their own vibe and their own sound, still being really heavy. And then this whole wave of industrial bands coming in, certainly led by Ministry, that were super heavy, but also had all the other industrial elements in there. And I know we're going to talk to Monte Pittman next, who's in Ministry these days.
Cool.
And a lot of, because I mentioned to him, like, hey, what was it that, and I remember talking to Al about it too in the studio, but I can't remember what his exact reason for it was. But I mean, why did you get so heavy? And basically, Monty summed it up. I'm like Mike, who was in Rigor Mortis, came in, and
yes.
He's a great guitar player with great riffs, and I think that's where a lot of that stuff came up. And Al's like, hey, this stuff sounds really good with what we're doing.
There's actually a Revolver interview where Al credits Mike with writing this main riff. So I don't know if he's not listed technically as one of the writers, but that would make sense to me given his kind of thrash background. So I'd be really interested to know who, because this is one of the best riffs of all time. In my parlance, I call it a main stage riff. It's one of those riffs that sounds good to 30 people or 30,000 people at a huge outdoor fest or something. Just the whole song is a masterclass to me in being simple but effective. And it's like, it really goes to show you that you really only do need one riff can be an entire song, and it doesn't get boring. It really holds your attention the whole time. And there's really only like a few guitar parts. There's not, when you really start to break it down, there's not a lot of stuff going on. It's just the production tricks, the sampling. It's also like a kind of a masterclass in how to incorporate samples in a really cool way. And I don't know which version you've heard the most, but the video version is actually different than the album version. And there's the William Burroughs samples on the video version. There's a whole backstory to how they got those. And there was like clearance issues. They ended up going directly to him. And there's, again, on Revolver, you can read all about that. And it's a very interesting story. But I kind of prefer the album version, and those the samples at the very beginning. Give me the Thorazine Man from the movie The Trip, which with Peter Fonda and Bruce Dern. And then there's the No from Hellraiser 2. Then there's just some weird like screaming and like creepy stuff that's kind of sprinkled in throughout the whole song. I couldn't find a definitive answer on what that sample is. There's rumors that it was sampled from Nine Inch Nails, but I don't think that's correct based on when that Nine Inch Nails EP came out and when this came out. And then there's Never Trust a Junkie from Sid and Nancy. And that's just the first 30 seconds of the song. There's already 4 samples that really are cool and play into the whole thing.
100%. And that's, that was kind of the genius of it back then, because you could use the samples until people kind of figured out, hey,
yes,
we need to get paid, which is why the video version is different, because
exactly.
they couldn't get clearance on all these movies and stuff. And that was, so many artists in the early 90s, including one of our artists, Guar, which used a bunch of samples, which got them and us into trouble on a couple of occasions. But yeah, you could kind of get away with that early on, and that's what so many of those industrial bands did. By the way, I think when we're talking about the riff, which is it's a complete heavy metal riff, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if Mike had something to do with it. But you never know.
Yes.
But they should have called the song just One Riff.
That's true.
Would have been a better title. But yeah, but it's interesting. Martin Popoff, at the beginning was kind of talking about the production of the song. It's very 90s, like the guitars are out front, the vocals are kind of in the back, and he's kind of mumbling a lot with that kind of that industrial style vocal, whatever effects they have on it. But that's why it really is the riff that surrounds the music and the whole song. And you're right, because I never really thought about it. I just listen to music. I don't think about different parts and different riffs and stuff that much, because I don't play the music. I just listen to it. But you're right, and Monty mentioned the same thing, which you'll hear shortly, that that riff is pretty much the whole song, but it's so good. Like it still could be 10 minutes long, and I still wouldn't get bored of that riff. I
mean, I listened to the song probably 30 times getting ready for this, and I'm still not bored of it by the end. So that really, I think, just shows you that a great riff, just you almost can't get sick of it if it's great.
Yeah, it's so good, and it was kind of the wild, wild west in terms of heavy music back then, because you had this whole, again, like I mentioned, the whole grunge scene, and then this whole scene starts coming in, and there's all these different subgenres of metal that were coming in. Certainly death metal was obviously beginning in the 90s, and it was reshaping really, what metal could and would be. And I love that, because you just can't stay the same. You've got to evolve, and it's got to be different. And I love these new elements coming in with this stuff and all the other things we talked about, because it really does add extra elements to it, where you go like, oh, well, heavy music can be industrialized or in any other way, and certainly Ministry did a great job. And I mean, those three records together were just massively huge. Like Martin said, this was the platinum record in the US. I think it was platinum in Canada and Australia, and it was a big record for them.
Yeah, and the label put out, I guess, a lot of money to record it too, and then they actually ended up doubling down, and I guess that after the label heard the first song, they were like, what is this? We don't know what this is. And, of course, it ended up being a huge hit, and it all worked out. So it's interesting, man. It really is.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely legendary stuff. Well, dude, you did great. You were phenomenal. So thanks for doing this, and we will talk to you again on this podcast. So
I would love that anytime. Just please, let me know. I'd be glad to.
And now we welcome in, him from Prong, longtime guitar player for Madonna, and currently he's in Ministry. He's also got a bunch of really great solo records out there, some of which are on Metal Blade Records. My friend, Mr. Monte Pittman, how are you, sir?
Hey, very good, very good. How are you guys doing? Great to see you.
All good. So how did you get into Ministry? That's my first question for you.
That first happened, I met Al through Tommy Victor. So one of the Prong albums, Power of the Damager, was recorded in El Paso.
Tornillo, Texas, by the way.
Tommy was playing in Ministry, and then Al produced the album. And so that's how we first met. And then me and Al just became friends. And it's one of those things that, over time you see each other, like maybe not for a long time, but you kind of become friends that way. And that sort of turned into, hey, one day we got to play some music together. And then in 2013 or 14, 15, somewhere on there, I joined the band then. Just as we were about to leave to go on tour, I got called to go back to Madonna. And so I figured that wasn't going to happen. But then, like 6 years ago or so, they reached out again where they needed a guitar player again. And so at this time, it worked out.
I figured it was the Tommy Victor thing because I know, Prong and Al had a thing. And real quick, so the studio in Tornillo, Texas, which is just outside of El Paso, it's owned by this pecan farmer. It's this gigantic pecan farm down there, and he's kind of a failed musician who wants to be in the music business somehow. So he put together this beautiful state-of-the-art studio. I've been there quite a few times. We had Cannibal Corpse record there a few times, and a bunch of other stuff. This is where I first met Al. Actually, Ministry was recording down there, and this was probably 2016 or something. It was a fun time talking to him. He was sober, very sober at the time, so that was good. It was very lucid and stuff. But yeah, great guy. It was fun. We got to hear a little bit of the stuff that he was doing because they have two. I don't know if they still do, but they had two studios down there. I think one of them they actually built for him. Maybe I don't remember, but. Yeah, great studio down there, and El Paso is kind of a cool little town there. Although you can't go into Juarez anymore, obviously from all the stuff going on, which is what it is. But yeah, great studio down there. Like I said, we've done Cannibal Corpse records down there. I think we did something else. Anyway, so we're talking about Just One Fix, and I thought that. Okay. To me, I mean, I love all those early Ministry, industrial metal or whatever you want to call them songs, but I always like this one just because the riff is so insanely heavy, and it really did usher in on a variety of levels a new form of metal. I mean, because we had heard stuff like this before, and there were some different things, but Ministry was able to do it and bring it to the masses where it became mainstream. I don't play guitar. I don't know how to play guitar.
I can change that.
No, you can't. Trust me. You can't. You always say that, but you can't. What's this riff like? Is it a simple riff? Is it a complex riff? I mean, I just know that it's amazing.
I think it's fairly simple. It's only on 3 frets, and I call that the magic frets. Like all the best riffs are on the 3rd fret, 5th fret, 6th fret. Those are just like the perfect notes that go with a great riff. So when we were making the Hopium for the Masses album, I would go over there to the studio even just to hang out just about every day. And so I got to kind of get in Al's head and see how he writes some of this music. And we would always take a lunch break and go, like, we'd have lunch, and I would ask him, like, how did you write this song? How did this happen? How did this happen? And when it came up to Just One Fix, I'm like, how did you write Just One Fix? And he said they had a sequencer, and they were putting in the notes, and that's as far as they could figure out the sequencer. Like, it just got to those notes, and then him and Mikey started playing that same sequencer riff on guitar. The whole song is just about one riff. There's one other riff that changes. That one riff carries the entire song.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to talk about that too. It's like it's such a great riff that it's pretty much that's the song. It's just that riff over and over again, but you don't ever get sick. And I think the magic of songs like that are like that riff is so good. Like I could listen to a 10-minute version of that song and not get tired of that riff.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun to play. That's a point in the show that I always look forward to when we play that. That's like the song we would sound check with.
Yeah, it's interesting too because, like I said, this was kind of a new different type of metal. And it was also really interesting because, talking about the early 90s and it was, they were, like you mentioned, sequencers, and there was, some of this computer technology coming into the recording, but not like what we have today. But they were doing stuff that, even on the drums that in some ways have come to form of like blast beats and various things that they're not necessarily doing blast beats exactly that, but they're experimenting with stuff like that. And it really worked. And it did kind of change the way a lot of people recorded the music and the drums and everything else, including in metal, because before that, you couldn't really use anything other than just generic, real drums. But this was a whole different genre coming from a whole different background. And I remember hearing that and going like, wow, that's really different, but it's really cool. And that kind of ushered in a whole new wave of how people make records and make metal records.
Yeah, it was very innovative for sure. And then, you know what, TV2, another song on that album, like it does get really fast where it borderlines, blast beats.
Yep.
There's also in Just One Fix, when I first joined the band, like over 10 years ago, and I was just listening to this stuff because, how I came into the band was I was, became friends with Al. This isn't something I went and said, oh, I want to audition for this band. It's just like, one of those things like where you're friends and then like, hey, man, we got to play together. And then that winds up happening. But then when I'm going and listening to this music, like where I'm going to learn it to perform it, it seems like the riff constantly changes. So like, you're, okay, am I supposed to count like it's going to go this way 12 times and then 16 measures later it's going to change? Like what if you lose count? But there's another track that just goes and that like blends in with the riff that makes the whole thing makes a machine.
Yep.
Sort of.
Yep. Yeah. And that's something else that he was really good, or Ministry in general, really good at, is combining those. And I love stuff like that. Back when I was producing records, we'd put in those little cherries, like stuff like that, just like a little extra thing in the background or an extra riff or an extra lead that is like one note higher than the other one. So it kind of goes up and down, just little stuff like that we, that I stole and we all stole from, Priest and Thin Lizzy and all those bands of the 70s.
Ear candy. Yeah.
Exactly. The Ministry was really great at that because when you listen to the records in headphones, like, I didn't really hear that part before, but now that I hear it, oh, wow, that makes so much more sense as to why it's such a full, complete, super heavy song, or super heavy riff.
Yeah, and then last year we put out the Squirrely Years. We remade the songs from the first two albums, and it's really incredible how you can see how you can take a song that's like one genre of music and sort of remake it to another genre of music, and it's still a good song. Like good songs are good songs.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I've always said that. You can also never go wrong with putting out a good song, whether it's popular or not, because popularity is that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, and that was the whole thing of the early 90s was, the old metal was dying or dead, which was fine because a lot of it become, hair metal and radio metal and all that garbage that needed to go away. And, you had the grunge stuff come in, and then, Ministry from Skinny Puppy and some of those other bands that were kind of in that same scene came out. And they also did a whole new version of metal that was fresh and new and interesting. I remember the first time hearing Ministry, I was like, whoa, this is really different, but I really like it. It's still really heavy, even though it's got all these different influences, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it crosses a few different genres. And then when we go out on tour, like did one tour where we had the Melvins and Corrosion of Conformity, and then another tour where we had Frontline Assembly and Nitzareb, like it's like, for the audience like that, it fits both styles. That some people may think like, oh, those are two different things, but it's, it all works together.
Yeah, I think, people now are much more embracive of that sort of stuff where you can have different bands go out with different bands. You couldn't, prior to really the early 90s, you couldn't do that, especially if you're a metal band. Like, oh, God forbid, there's some other weird band on there. But yeah, and I noticed the last time I saw you guys was just, I like to watch the crowd and stuff. I'm always in the crowd. I don't like to watch from backstage or any of that nonsense. But it's really interesting because you had a lot of hardcore metal people but you had a lot of other people that were more alternative leaning or, industrial leaning. And I thought it was interesting because everybody had the same response, obviously, because you guys are amazing live. But it was really cool to see that cross section of people. And again, if you rewind 30 some odd years ago, you couldn't really see that at a show necessarily because it wasn't cool for this type of audience to go to a show like that, or for a metal type of audience to go to that show. So I like that all these barriers have kind of been broken down, and certainly Ministry was one of the leading forces of that.
Yeah, you see, all walks of life. There's a variety of everything, at the shows. You'll see little kids up front, with their parents, and it's something that's unique with that band for sure.
So we got to get into your story. If you don't know Monty's story, it's like one of the greatest stories of all time. From beautiful Longview, Texas, which I'm very familiar with, came to Hollywood to work at Guitar Center, and I'll let you tell the story about how you became Madonna's guitar player and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I was working at Guitar Center. I was terrible at selling guitars, or selling the guitars that would make you money. And I'd also joined prom. And at the time, I lived in Redondo Beach because I liked the area. I didn't know any better. I just my cousin had lived in Manhattan Beach, and I went to visit her, and that's when I said, "Oh, I'm moving to LA. Like, this is great."
Yeah.
So I worked at Guitar Center in Hollywood because I figured I would meet the most musicians there. And then I rehearsed with Prong up in Burbank. So not realizing how, never living in a big city like that before, I didn't realize how much driving was involved. And after a while, the last thing I wanted to hear was the sound of a guitar after working at Guitar Center and stuff like that. So I came up with this idea of like, okay, either I'm going to just move back to Texas, or before I do that, people used to always come in and ask for guitar teachers. There weren't any. I figured it's Hollywood. There's, I used to say, like, isn't like Steve Vai teaching down the street? Not that he would do that, but or maybe he would. I said, look, I'm going to quit. I don't sell enough of the guitars, the right guitars, to make commission. You had to sell so much before you even made commission. So I said, okay, I'm going to make these cards. Everybody you sell a guitar to, give them my card, and I'll give you like $20 each student. And people are like, oh, you don't have to do that. So I do that. And then all of a sudden, I'm it started really taking off. And my second or third inquiry was this guy saying he wanted to take lessons. He needed to get lessons for his boss. And the way he said this, it sounded like like a contractor that makes buildings or something like that. And so I drive up, I drive up to this house, and I'm at the gate, and I go in and I pull in and I park my car, and I'm like, am I seeing this right? And there's Madonna, pregnant, out to here and sitting with her daughter. And I'm like, okay, all right, what's this all about? And I get out and I say, hey, I'm here to see Guy. And she was dating Guy Ritchie. And so I was there to teach Guy Ritchie. And I didn't know who this was. It's before Snatch came out. And he had surgery on his knee, and so he was kind of like off his feet. She had bought him an acoustic guitar. And this is when like Coldplay and Radiohead and Oasis, all these kind of bands were, really big. So like acoustic guitar was something featured in all that music.
Yeah.
So perfect for teaching and saying, hey, here's E minor, here's G, here's E, here's the same chords in these songs. So you have something you could play. And so I started going over to the house and teaching him like 3 times a week. And then I became friends with Madonna from that because I'm teaching her boyfriend. And then she put out her music album. And when that happened, so at this time I had moved up to Hollywood, and I had a roommate. And I was just sitting in my room, and I was just practicing, and my roommate says, are you still going to that woman's house? And I'm like, that's just a strange way for him to put that. And he goes, I heard that she put out a new album today. I just grabbed my keys, and I didn't say anything to him. I just hauled ass down the street, and I got to, was it Virgin? Yeah, Virgin, that was at Crescent Heights and Sunset. And they were about to lock the door. And I said, hey, can I just get that CD? And they're like, okay. And so they let me buy that CD. So then I went home and I listened to it, and I wrote out every song. And the next morning I had a lesson with Guy, and there was a song that she wrote for him, and the chords are A minor, G, D. And I'm like, this is perfect. So I say, hey, check this out. The album came out yesterday, and this song that she wrote, it's these same chords that I'm teaching you. And he's like, wow. He goes, how did you get this? I'm like, well, the album came out yesterday. He goes, yeah, I know the album came out yesterday. How did you get it? I'm like, well, the album came out yesterday, and I wrote it out. He's like, you already figured out the entire album? I'm like, yeah. I didn't want to say it's just A minor G, And so then he just walked out of the room, and I'm like, it was almost like I felt like, did I do something wrong? But he told her, he's like, this dude coming over here, he figured out your whole album and wrote it out. And so then I was like, all right. So then I start teaching her, and I figured, she'll take one lesson and that'll be it. Then I started going over and seeing her like 3 times a week, which, this is a big part of my week now, is going over and teaching both of them. She hadn't even been taking lessons for a month from me. And she would always kind of like, like play around with me, joke around with me. And especially then, like I was fresh from Texas, and she said something like, the way she said it was like, hey, yeah, you want to come play Letterman with me? on Thursday or something?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." We're tuning our guitars. I thought she was just playing around, being funny. And at the end of the lesson, she says, "Okay, well, my manager will reach out and we'll set up all the travel and all that." And I'm like, you're not joking. Like, I'm going to go play David Letterman with you in a few days. And so then I went and, so I played Letterman with her. And that was one of those moments where here's your life before this thing occurs, and here's your life after. That was a life-changing moment. And it's one of those moments that people will bring up to me and say, "Oh, wait, you're the guy that played with her on Letterman." Yeah, we were watching TV and we saw that last night. Like, "Oh, that's cool. Madonna's playing guitar with Ministry." When we were on tour with Rob Zombie, he mentioned that. He's like, "Oh," he goes, "Yeah, we were watching TV that night," and go, "Oh, wow, that's cool. Madonna's playing guitar now."
Yeah. So when you first went over there, I mean, it's Madonna. And you're from a little town in West Texas, and you're just moving to the big city. Were you not like intimidated or freaked out? It's like, "Oh my God, this like huge star," or you're just like, "Oh, whatever, just another person."
No, and looking back and looking through the lens of that everything happens for a reason sort of way of thinking, working at Guitar Center in Hollywood, you saw there was someone that you've seen on TV or some sort of celebrity or whatever every day coming in there.
Yeah, that's true.
My favorite story is I helped David Carradine with strings, and he was barefoot. So
of course he was.
I'll never know, like, did he come there barefoot or did he take his shoes off in the car and walk in? I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to look down and get a roundhouse to the face.
Yeah, right. He was in character, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, there was always somebody in there, so that didn't really faze me.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
I didn't grow up listening to Madonna's music. That's not something I would have sought out. In a way, I'm glad that happened the way it happened, because I have a fresh outlook going into her music. It's kind of the same for Ministry also. I didn't grow up listening to Ministry, but all my friends, it was like their favorite band. My favorite band was like Metallica and Pantera and Slayer. All the bands that all of your bands that you helped bring in. So Monty.
I should have mentioned at the top, but Monty's a legitimate metalhead. He knows his stuff. All I remember was my buddy Chris Barnes from Cannibal Corpse and 6 Feet Under mentioned that he had met you somewhere, and he went to the Madonna show, and like right in the middle of one of the songs, you played like, I don't know, a riff or two from either Cannibal or 6 Feet Under in the middle of the Madonna set. I mean, really? Holy shit. That was pretty insane.
When the show he came to, my amp was on the side of the stage. I think, yeah. My amp was like on the side of it wasn't on the stage, like on the side of the stage and facing where he was. And so some of the stuff, since he was there, I would like throw in little bits also just to kind of.
That's so crazy. Yeah, it's funny how, when, you're, again, an icon, Madonna, the whole thing and everything, but you never know what, in our world, whether that's cool or not cool, right? So I remember we went to go see Fozzy, which Chris Jericho's band, who's a friend of mine. We went to go see him out in Corona, and it was literally down the street from Kerry King's house. And Kerry and Jericho are friends, and obviously, I've been friends with Kerry forever. So we all ended up at Kerry's house after the show, and we're all hanging out and stuff. And I just introduced, like, here's my buddy Monty, and he plays guitar or whatever. Because you never know, like, what Kerry would say. It's like, oh, right, he's Madonna's guitar player. Well, that would be cool, or he'd be like, what the fuck? So finally, it was later in the evening. And I go, I should tell you Monty's day job. Monty plays guitar for Madonna, and Kerry goes, oh my God, Gary Holt is one of the biggest Madonna fans on the planet. I can't believe I'm here with Madonna's guitar player, freaking out. And then didn't they both go to a show in Europe? Both Gary and Kerry went to a Madonna show in Europe, I think.
Yes, yeah. And Paul came. Yeah, I think Paul came. Tom.
I think they all went.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the shows where you would very nicely give us the tour of the stage and everything. And I remember Madonna's guitar tone for her electric guitar was it Raining Blood or was some Slayer thing?
That's right. It was modeled from Kerry's amp. Yeah.
Yeah. So I took a photo of that, sent it to Kerry, and he's like, "That's awesome."
I forgot about that, man. That's a trip.
Yeah, it's funny.
I bring that up to her sometimes, and she's just like, "Wow." Like, one of the like the metal and Madonna stories is of hanging out with Anthrax, and they were asking me all this stuff. They have all these stories about her back in the day. Like, hey, they've gone over to her house and
in New York, sure.
And I'm like, what? And then Charlie and Scott and Frankie were like asking me oh, do you play the Prince parts on Like a Prayer? I'm like, Prince didn't. No, they asked like, do you guys play Like a Prayer? I'm like, yeah. Do you get to play Prince's parts? And I'm like, Prince didn't play on that. And they go, oh yeah, he did. I'm like, no, he wrote a song on that album, but he didn't play on that. They go, ask her. So I'm like, okay. So next time I see her, I'm like, settle something for me. I'm hanging out with Anthrax, and they tell me, they're telling me all this stuff about your album and that Prince played on. They're like, how'd they know that? And I said, is that true? And she goes, yeah, but I guess there's two things that Prince didn't want credit on. That's the story of what I was told is that from playing guitar on Like a Prayer and playing synth on Stand Back from Stevie Nicks.
Oh wow!
And then I guess he didn't want it to overshadow the, take away from the song of like, okay, here's this song featuring this person.
Sure, yeah, I get that.
That's funny how like these metal guys, they know her music better than me for on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and that first time because I'd seen her once a long time ago, but when you were, I think it was the first time after I'd met you, she did that big huge tour, and the first show, I think it was in New York. I was asking, so one of your parts, just in case I get bored and I might like walk around the arena or something, but the show was so incredible that I was just like, my gosh, this show is unbelievable, and the whole show was great, and the choreography, the set list and stuff was really great. And she was pushing the envelope pretty hard on that tour too. Like she did that whole thing where she lays down at the end of one of the songs and says something about Jesus liking her private areas. And I was like, man, like Slayer think they're over the top. I think I texted Carrie and I said, yeah, you guys think you're super satanic. This is what Madonna just did on stage.
Now you have to top her, Slayer. Like tomorrow's show, you got
yeah, like what do you do? So yeah, it's funny how those, I mean, I've just seen it so much in the music world and even sports world, how metal collides with so many different things where you wouldn't expect it to be, or fans, because even there's tons of metalheads that love Madonna, that are like massive fans of hers over all these years. So yeah, you just never know. But yeah, you got to live that for a while, which is pretty cool, obviously. Anyway, back to Ministry. So
yes, yeah,
and Just One Fix. Yeah, it was such a landmark. I mean, really the whole record. I think of all the records that Ministry made, this one, Psalm 69, I think is the best overall one. But there's that 3 sections kind of where they kind of turned like really metal. Do you know where that came from? Is from Al? Did he just naturally be heavier, or was it something that he decided like I want to get heavier, or do you know where that came from?
That's a good question. I'll ask him that. But
I mentioned that he was recording when we were down in Cannibal Corpse, and ended up hanging out a lot with him. I think I remember asking him that question, but so long ago I can't remember what the answer was. Unfortunately,
I think a lot of that came from Mikey.
Yeah,
because I think Mikey came on during The Mind Is a Terrible Thing to Taste.
Yeah.
And so I think there was probably more time, because Mikey played for Rigor Mortis. And
yeah, I was going to say Mike was in the band that we worked with, Rigor Mortis.
Yeah. And so, Al was like, hey, I want to showcase my guitar player, and this is what he does really well.
I think that's what he said too, was the same thing, where he came in and had that metal thing, so we might as well kind of go from there. But I mean, it worked perfectly. It was, just such a fresh new thing that you're like, wow, this is cool. And what I love about it too is so here we are again, all these years later, and we talk about, a lot of the times on this podcast, I'm going back to, whether it's 70s, 80s, 90s music, not as much about today, because that's really the foundation of where heavy metal came from. And, these are songs that define the genre. So I think it's important to talk about all this sort of stuff. You listen to stuff that you liked when you were younger that came out, 30 some odd years ago. And a lot of times you're like, it just doesn't have the same, I don't have the same reaction to it. It doesn't feel the same. But I listen to this stuff, and even, seeing you guys live, I mean, it's just as good and fresh today, if not better than it was back in the day. I think as a band, because everybody back in the day, Ministry wasn't as together, let's say, as they are now.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were on fire, and it's so great to see.
You can tell that we're all really close friends having a good time on stage.
Yes.
And I didn't realize this with some other bands, but I've seen other bands that or some of my favorite bands, but then afterwards they don't really hang out a lot or talk a lot. Like, we make sure to always, I'll warm my hands up, and I'll do some, I do a lot of backing vocals. I'll do some vocal warm-ups, but one of the most important things is making time where we all just hang out. And like there'll be a time me and Al will just sit and whatever, even if we're just sitting in the lounge on the bus, and then we're always laughing at stuff, and there's a lot of laughter and a lot of great times. We don't have great times like he had back in the 90s, like not those kind of great times, thankfully,
Thankfully, by the way.
but even better times. And I think it really shows when you see us and hear us live and in the recordings.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's very true. When you see there are a lot of bands, unfortunately, that exactly what you say, like they're in it because the band is really big, but they don't necessarily hang out or even see each other other than on stage a lot of times. And look, sometimes that works. The tension sometimes works because, especially with, angry metal music. But I find that it's just better for everybody if everybody gets along. Like, we're really lucky. All the bands on Metal Blade, everybody gets along, and the bands are all good guys. They all hang out. But I've seen, plenty of other big artists where that's not the case. And it's the backstage areas can be a little uneasy sometimes when you're wandering around there. But whatever it is. But look, certainly I think for a band to be successful, and especially when you're on the road, you're in a tour bus together. If you're not getting along, that can't be a lot of fun. Maybe you just get it all out on stage, but I think it's always much better if you could, enjoy what you're doing and not have it be like, oh, I'm going to go on tour again with these idiots.
Yeah. And then, performing these songs are a lot of fun too. It gets to where with a Ministry set, it's like, okay, what's gonna, what song do we cut? Well, we've got to do this one. We've got to do this one. We've got to do this one. And we should do this one because, we'll bring up at different times, like, that'd be cool to throw this back in the set. Here's a song that's never been done. Okay, if we do that, that means which one of these do we cut?
Something else has to go, yeah. Those are good decisions, though. It's like, for Metallica, for example, they've got so many different songs. That's why they can do, 2 sets on a weekend with no repeats. And, they were nice enough to me over the years to be, when they were doing their set list, and they would always interchange songs. They'd have a core set list, but then there'd be 5 or 6 different songs. They'd just pick from 40 different songs. They've been nice enough to let me pick some of those songs sometimes, because it is hard, because, they've got an awful lot of really good songs, especially live. So it's always fun to go in. I usually try to pull something out that's a little bit not of the norm, so to speak. Like, for example, I asked them to play Trapped Under Ice once on I think the Death Magnetic tour, and they hadn't played it for like 16, 17 years. And I was there for 2 shows. They didn't play the first show, but they played the second show. I was like, oh, cool. And then they kind of added it back into the set list for a minute. So I was like, oh, cool. I gave Trapped Under Ice another life for a minute, but those are good decisions. Those are good problems to have.
Yeah, and then,
which of these amazing songs can we not play now?
And that's so cool that you can go see Metallica and say, "Hey, we play this one for me," and they'll go, "Hey, yeah."
Well, I've known them since before they were even a band, so it's an interesting dynamic. But they're good. They're such good.
You should see how far you can take it. Say, what if you guys come out and open with Dyer's Eve, and then go into Fight Fire with Fire, and then go into Damage Incorporated with no stops?
That probably wouldn't go over too well. It would be amazing. It would be amazing.
Their fastest songs. I'd be like,
right. All right. wear out Lars by the third song. It's crazy. So what do you got going on? What are your socials? Where can people find you? What else do you have going on?
It's at Monte Pittman everywhere. MontePittman. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everything.
X.
And X, right. Well, we're working on the next Ministry album. It's thinking about, like, set lists and stuff like that. That's for my input. Everybody's input's going to be a little different, of course, but that's what I think about going into. It's like, okay, how would these songs blend in with what we're already doing in the set list? And it's taking shape, really well. It's pretty cool. And then for me, I'm finishing up my next album, that I've been working on off and on for like 8 years. I kind of stopped, there was I toured and then went back with Madonna, and then we had COVID, and then, you know, had all this time with ministry, and then other stuff, you know, that I've been doing. And so I've been, you know, slowly but surely getting back into, my stuff. And it was good to kind of, it's not like I took a break, but I just took my time. But in that process, kind of learned a lot about myself and what I do. When I first moved to LA, I started taking lessons from Dolores Rhodes, and we met from we were both at this guitar.
Vocal lessons?
It was music theory, really.
Oh, music theory. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's famous, obviously, for all that.
Right. And that's how she would teach. And I learned so much from her. And one of the things was that you have your signature. It's what you do that no one else does. It's part of your DNA. It's just what you do naturally. And the key is to hone in on that, which, you know, from playing music, you know, it's one of the things I love about playing with Madonna is that you've got every style, every genre of music that you get to play. But now it's like going back and then listening to my earlier stuff. Because like when you make your own album, you usually don't go back and listen to it. By the time it comes out, you've listened to it so much, you're kind of burnt out on it. It's like when you give it to the world. But I'm going through and listening to, you know, just like tricks that I've done before in other songs, going, oh, wait, I'm doing that here. I'm doing that here. All right, let's really make that as good as we can make it. Anyway, I'm halfway through mixing that. I can't wait for you to hear it. And other than that, I'm teaching. I teach guitar lessons right here, teach online.
Right. Yeah, if you want some lessons from a legendary guitar player, here you go.
Yeah, so that's been the majority of it, teaching, finishing my album, and working on this ministry album. That's been the main things. Not too many other hours left in the day.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. Always good to see you.
Thanks for having me, man.
I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Yes, I'll be seeing you very soon.
And that'll do it. Thanks again to my good friend, Mr. Monte Pittman, Ryan Williams of Metal Blade Records, Mr. Martin Popoff, as always. Our theme music is from Lizzie Borden, and the guy who keeps everything going here and makes it all happen, producer Christian Blatt. We will see you guys next episode. Thanks for listening.
100